As we know, comic films have been a major interest to comic fans and the general audience, as well as they have been dominating the big screen for generations. A created trend within the past 15 years in the film world, of course, all started from Marvel in the MCU, when they made a connectivity, a connected universe that have now stemmed to all other studios wanting to make their own connected universes with their own unique IPs that could potentially rival comic brands. Now, the MCU, of course, isn't alone. There are other continuities out there. If you follow more fixed narratives, you start to get into things like the Dark Knight trilogy, which can also benefit from removing itself from being so tied down by the source material. It allows you to have free range of creative choices. As for comic books, both DC and Marvel, they've shown over 80 years experience of connected continuities with every character merged together in one massive story. These are two companies that have more or less dominated that idea through their comic book worlds, and Marvel has certainly done a good enough job at making it work in the films. With comic book IPs being more popular than ever, driving major success to films and new readers for the comics themselves, which medium truly captures the best formula to connected universes and continuity? Movies or comics? What interests you more? What works better? Now, I had someone recently who asked me this exact question, and there's also this comment that was left on my rapid response post by Batman Doom, who also reminded me to make a video like this. Do superhero movies shows come out better in separate universes or connected? Batman has benefited greatly from having movies in their own continuity, but no one would watch an Ant-Man movie if it wasn't part of a connected universe. That is a little bit of a separate topic based off of what we're going to talk about here, but it is close enough to have included it in the conversation, and we will get to that a little later in the video. Now, let's look at comic books and the way they handle the continuity. Taking DC, for example, they love to rebrand and reboot their continuities every new generation or so in the attempt to bring in new fans and readers. And with that has come a vast exploration of the multiverse, which DC plays with heavy in the comics, and Marvel recently in the movies. I'm sure they do it in the comic books just as much. Maybe, you know what, actually not as much as DC, because DC just loves it off to every extent, but I'm still sure Marvel does it. In saying that, I do know much more DC lore than Marvel, and as far as I'm concerned, Marvel has never rebooted their continuities in the ways that DC has. But please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not 100% sure. Regardless, as comic fans, we more or less know how to keep up with the changes that get made in these worlds. Considering it's a fast-paced genre of storytelling, we almost have no choice but to get with the program. With comics, you have the capability of showing off flexibility and creativity to try new things. Personally, I support Elseworlds far more than the main continuity, because I do believe that's where the true creativity lies. But the main continuities still manage to sprinkle it in every now and then. In the main continuities, in the way that comic books handle it, you do get the benefit to explore these characters and every single aspect of their stories while they interact with the rest of the growing universe. And I'm just going to use a random example here. Batman might be dealing with a no man's land type situation in Gotham, while at literally the same time, Green Lantern is fighting a lantern war 300,000 light years away from Earth, and Superman is trapped on Warworld. You get to build out these hugely expansive worlds where every single one of these characters can come together and work with one another, but they all have their own problems and situations and stories, and it just makes the world feel all that much bigger. With that being said, this fast-paced environment does make it difficult for casual fans to keep track of almost anything, and the fandoms can also be very intimidating, which keeps those casual fans from becoming, I guess you could say, more hardcore fans. I will say, though, even comic book fans might feel inconsistencies, as well as losing interest in storylines. After so many years of reading, there are only so many things you can try in the main continuities, especially when you know the survival and the integrity of these characters can't be tampered with. My experience with a lot of hardcore comic fans, I do tend to find that they claim they want change, they really want new things, but when those new things, when that change enters the picture, they don't end up liking any of it, and they just want it to go back to what they already know. And that's why it can get really boring for a lot of people. It can be very difficult for new readers, and even sometimes experienced readers who are trying to get back into comic books. Jumping into these worlds filled with complexity is not easy. There is so much recent history that goes into these comic book stories, and there's so much lore that you need to refresh yourself on or to get to know. It might not be worth it for a lot of people. Maybe certain people don't have the time or the interest. Jumping into the middle of a comic book story where there's constant major events and universe-shattering enemies, it's not easy to identify a starting point. And it's also not a cheap hobby. Let's also keep that in mind. Now, today on the internet, especially on YouTube, there are so many videos you could find of the best starting point to start reading Batman or Spider-Man or the Avengers, Teen Titans. There are so many videos that could tell you and teach you the lore of the world so that you're not completely lost when trying to jump into a comic book run or series of a character. But it still doesn't make it any less intimidating when trying to bring someone over to the comic book continuities because of how much is going on. It's definitely comic book reader friendly, but it can be very hard for newcomers. Now, let's look at some of the points of the movie continuities. There have been many, as I said a little earlier, but the most important one is the MCU, which has been ongoing since 2008. Pretty crazy to think about. There is also the DCEU, which has had a very shaky history with rock bottom moments. We're soon to be getting the DCU, but who knows how that will even turn out. And there are self-contained or self-prioritizing stories like the Dark Knight trilogy, the X-Men franchise, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and a couple more. Now, in response to Bat Doom's comment that reminded me to make a video like this, there are characters that have benefited to a connected universe, considering there would be no way their films could exist without it. Like you say, Ant-Man. Whereas a character like Batman or Spider-Man, they've proven they can exist without their respective universes. Those top tier characters will never have a problem getting butts in seats at theaters and making sales all over the board. But for some of those other characters, they need to count themselves lucky for having a universe built around a particular brand in which they can survive on the big screen. With that, being able to watch very top tier characters and even lower tier characters now share the screen with one another, they've become far more digestible to the general audience and casual fans than comic books ever were. What these universes have done is made it easier for those general audience fans to now know those lesser tier characters because they are being thrown into the movies after everything's already been pre-established. Everything important you need to know, now you can enter those characters. Film can also be seen as big events. Look how Star Wars used to be treated. It was almost looked at as a worldwide celebrated national holiday whenever a new movie would release. Marvel has created the MCU to operate very similarly. clearly by giving us a continuity that has spanned a multitude of characters and storylines over a total of 17 years. Keep in mind, does that count what we're currently getting from Marvel right now? I don't really think so. It hasn't been going too well for them over the past couple of years. However, if they can hit the jackpot on this upcoming Doomsday film, I think they're going to be okay. But most importantly, the films have created new fans who have then divulged themselves into comic book lore. At least some of them, because there are still some who would rather just be a fan of the movies. Even some characters' best or favorite portrayals by people have come from film adaptations. A lot of these films and performances have been held sacred. However, getting into the cons, some adaptations take extreme creative turns that some people don't really resonate with. And using it as an example, Joker 2, that resonated with nearly nobody. Now, that's not me saying it's good or bad, that's a subjective viewpoint, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it's not talked about fondly. Now, of course, Joker 2 is not in a connected universe. However, that does not mean Marvel hasn't had their stinkers as well, because they have, and it falls within the same example that there are just some creative choices they make in their movies that don't always go too well, especially with comic fans. And we do need to keep in mind, a lot of the complaints we're going to get from films are going to be two things. The fans claiming that this isn't how it should be, they're not going by the source material, I don't like that. And then from the general audience who simply do not resonate with the movie, not because they technically have any problems with the source material, that's not their focus, it's just a movie that wasn't as entertaining to them as they were hoping it to be. Some of these films can even have inconsistent tones compared to the comics or the stories that they're inspired from, so they're not matching up exactly the way that some of these creatives might want it to be. And some of these stories may not feel as fleshed out and deep in film as they do in comics, considering you have so much more material to dive into in the books compared to live action. You don't necessarily have a capping point in the comic books, whereas in film or TV or live action in general, you can't go on forever and you need to stop it somewhere. And that can leave a lot off the table. So both of the movie continuity and the comic continuity have their advantages and disadvantages. When I look at comics, I'd say their advantage is having the ability to add full depth and longer scopes to characters, adding on to that full depth of storytelling and complex arcs, along with the ability to change things at will using their multiverse, which, as I said, is something DC does in the comic books quite a lot. Their disadvantage is comics can be a lot harder for newcomers to keep up with or even get into, and it is harder to digest, especially with consistently changing continuities. As for movies, the advantages are they're far more accessible to audiences while providing intriguing epics that even hardcore comic fans can enjoy or love. The disadvantage is that the films can have many restrictions due to fan outrage, to the point where stories can be limited in its complexity and depth. So if you were waiting for me to have an answer for you on who does it better, I don't really have one, because I don't think there is an answer. I'm sure a more or less objective point of view would be that the comic book continuities are better. At the end of the day, if you didn't have those comic books, you wouldn't be able to be getting a movie continuity right now. But I do believe that both comics and movies, the continuities they're bringing to the table today, it's important depending on the ways you choose it to be and what works for certain audiences in particular times. I know for me, for example, I find it hard to keep up with the continuity of DC today. There's just not many storylines that really interest me. However, that doesn't mean I don't respect it. I absolutely do. I think it is amazing that they're capable of continuously giving us continuities even if they are rebooted every 10 to 15 years. And the same thing goes for Marvel. All of these storylines and all the ways that some of these characters may change over time, it's really interesting to see how people can keep up with it and even how writers keep up with it as well. It's definitely a testament to how these two companies have stayed on top for so long. As for the films, they're just as important when it comes to making these companies money. Also, being able to give people some of their favorite movies they've ever seen. And now when you throw these films in connected universes, it makes it feel like it's just one piece of an epic painting. At the end of the day, what is the most important is enjoying both in ways that you choose. If you like the films more than the comics or the comics more than the films, that's all up to you. You like what you like. But now what I want you guys to do is head to the comments below and let me know who you think does connected universes better, the movies or the comic books. And even take it one step further, going into the future 10, 20 years from now, do you think that the film world will still be able to upkeep these connected universes? Or do you think it'll eventually drop off and it'll go right back to being just comic books? That is all I have for you on this one, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and until the next time, I will talk to you all very soon.